Welcome to the Rotowire Fantasy Sports Podcast, the Jake and Joe edition. Which of course, will take place every Tuesday up until the actual NFL playoffs. Normally, each Tuesday, we'll talk waiver wire pickups, guys you want to roster, guys you want to get ahead of things. But that'll happen, obviously, closer to the start of the season. For now, we're going to focus on tips and tricks for new fantasy players and just overall general strategies we've noticed while doing our off-season drafts. Stick around. The show is about to start once I figure out the correct button to play. Oh, goodness. This is obviously a great way to begin. All right. Well, Jake, because I'm struggling to figure out the button to press and because we don't need any more awkward silence, let's get on with it, actually. Welcome to the Tuesday. Jake had to save me on that one. Thank you very much.
I don't know if I could do that as a gift or not. But, hey, it's great to be back, everybody.
Definitely need. Yeah, welcome to the Tuesday, July 26th edition of the Rotowire NFL podcast brought to you by Dynasty Owner. I'm Joe Bartel. You can find me at JB Fantasy Sports. At least tell me on Twitter next time to learn the buttons before I begin the podcast, if nothing else. And here with me, the guy who saved the day is Jake Letarski at RotoJake. Before we get started, obviously, I outline what we're going to do. We're talking about general strategies, in particular redraft strategies, whether it's superflex or your base PPR 12-team formats. We got them both covered. I want to get a word from our sponsors here, Dynasty Owner. Do you love fantasy sports and are you ready for a new challenge this year? If that's the case, Dynasty Owner is the new way to play fantasy football with real NFL salaries, adding to the strategy of running an actual franchise. Dynasty Owner, my goodness, provides a unique and challenging experience that'll test your skills as an owner and general manager. You'll have complete control over your team's future. You can build the draft, make trades, sign free agents, and manage your team's salary cap. Can you create a dynasty of champions? Sign up now at dynastyowner.com and use promo code ROTO5. That's ROTO5 to receive $5 off your new team. I currently have a team in the Expert Dynasty Owner League. I won last year, thanks in large part to Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp. And I'm in a complete rebuild as a result because my salaries with Lamar Jackson and a few other QBs didn't match up. So that's the fun part of this. I just won last year. I'm trying to rebuild the team. I think Dynasty Owner is a really unique experience. I'm having a lot of fun right now participating in it. So obviously, Jake, we're going to be talking general strategies for today. You and I both have had some recent drafts. I did the Vegas Rotowire draft, which I talked about on SiriusXM last Friday, and I did the Superflex draft as well, too. And you participated in I think it was the SiriusXM draft from like a couple weeks ago when you were at the FSTA convention, right?
FSGA in Detroit, they built a nice new MGM Grand casino there. So we got back together for a conference. That was a little over a month ago. And I took 5th overall here, and we'll get to that a little bit towards the end, and we'll see from there. We'll give it a go here. It seems like I might be having some trouble with some sound on my end here. I want to double check that. Here, let me just quick change the setting here.
Okay. While you do that, Jay Red asks, can I pick a kicker in the first round? No. I would still recommend, as has been the day since fantasy football has started, do not take a kicker in the first round. No matter what Chris List's articles might tell you with Justin Tucker and his love for Justin Tucker, definitely not one you want to take in the first round. I caught that in the Jake and the Mike. I wonder if the listeners also did as well, too.
Yeah. So, no kickers in the first round. How do I sound, guys? Can you get me now?
Definitely loud, at least to my ears. I'm not positive about anybody else.
All right. So I'm just going to lean forward. Sorry about the quality here. I just flipped to the whole computer sound. This soundboard has been giving me hell here. So hopefully we are free of issues. We can edit out that whole mess of an intro for the podcast version, and we can get after it, guys. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for bearing with us here. Anyway, as I was saying, we'll talk about my draft in the end. I did an FSGA Experts League about a month ago, and it was a 14-team full PPR, which, again, it throws a wrench in the whole roster construction here. So the theme of a show today here is going to be just general draft strategy, preferred draft spots, and roster construction. And I will say one thing before we get started. I come from the MMA background, right? Or I guess I was doing football coverage here before MMA. But if I've learned anything from MMA and professional fighting, it's that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? Yes. And it is the same thing. Mm-hmm. It is the same thing with fantasy football here. You can You can have your draft strategy plan. You can have a set of players, a set of targets in each round, but you absolutely have to react. You have to get ready for someone to snipe a player that you thought for sure would fall to you. You have to get ready to recognize a value, even if it means taking your third running back, third wide receiver. If a tremendous value comes to you in these first couple rounds, you have to jump on it here. And that's why you're always kind of comparing, the cheat sheet in the draft room to ADP, to our RotoWire custom rankings here. You have to be ready to call an audible, and just take it from there and execute your plan. So we'll give you some general plans, some general tips, and we'll show you how that applied to drafts that you and I have both been doing so far this year. But once again, you're going to have to be flexible here. You don't want to be, caught with your pants down, so to speak, and not know what to do because something unexpected happened here. So hopefully that gets the clear point, because again, we'll give you some tips, but be ready to adapt is what I'm saying.
I've always said, especially as we've transitioned over to this, we'll do Rotowire podcast every week. Everyone has their certain brands and the certain things they're targeting. And I really appreciate, Jake, that you have kind of dived into this over the last couple of years, where we're trying to help the newer players. Certainly if you're an experienced player too, I think there's a lot of strategies and recommendations and just thought processes that maybe you hadn't went there before. And I've always consumed fantasy sports media in the way that I want as many opinions as possible. We're able to present that to you, and I think in a way that a lot of people, especially newer, might be able to get behind and understand. It's great to see all the new faces and some of the returning faces from previous years that we've been doing these podcasts. I don't know what year we're on, 4 or 5 actually doing the show together, but it's been great, and I'm looking forward to kickstart the rest of the season. Again, we're going to have shows up until the start of the actual NFL playoffs, so it's grind time for you and me for the rest of the NFL season, which I can't wait for.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we'll give you a variety of topics, and of course, get after us on Twitter if you want to hear about any specific topics. But I know, Joe, you kind of had some structure to the show. A draft strategy show can be a little bit all over the place. But where do you want to start?
Well, we actually have a bit of breaking news that occurred a little bit earlier today, and I think it's going to go under the radar because the surgery is at times it's unpredictable, but you more or less know the recovery time frame. Obviously, most teams, I think every team, by the end of today, will have been reporting to training camp, either the players or coaches. We do have news that Joe Burrow actually has appendicitis, which means he's having his appendix removed, will not be at practice, obviously, today. What that report is not going to say is he's not going to be at practice probably for the rest of the week. I don't know if they want to clarify that now. As somebody who had appendicitis last year, has appendix removed from an emergency surgery, whatever else, I can tell you Burrow is not practicing for this week. And I would be shocked if you see Joe Burrow at all for the entire preseason. I having went through this again just this past year, it was, I was walking after 2 weeks, and I imagined much more fit and athletic Joe Burrow would be able to do that much sooner. But I'm thinking like taking hits, things like that. There's no way that's going to be occurring until much later in the preseason. I'm not moving to about my rankings at all, but I think you should be mindful of it.
Yeah, absolutely not. You don't touch him in your rankings. He's the same outlook, that he was ahead of time. And, I guess if we're going to talk in, like some minor breaking news points today, I did see that Derrick Henry, they pretty much made it clear he's going to sit out the entire postseason. So, that's a little bit of news there. And, once we get to my draft, I have some strong takes on Derrick Henry that definitely contradict some of our other analysts here. So it'll be some fun topics of conversation and how I just busted up a draft strategy and possibly busted up a strategy of some other people behind me, coming out of the 5th spot there. But little bits of news and notes. It's really hard to dissect this in training camp here. Very rarely on day one of training camp, those types of news to me have as much of an impact on how I'm fantasy drafting as Aaron Rodgers showing up looking like Nick Cage from Con Air. Total badass, by the way. Again, it's just training camp news. We can filter that kind of stuff out for now.
Yeah, again, actionable news will occur throughout the training camp process, and ourselves, and I'm sure many other people on the Rotowire podcast network will discuss it too. But just wanted to point that out when it comes to Joe Burrow, that I would anticipate he will not play much, if at all, during the preseason. Okay, so I had mentioned we're talking redraft strategy, and I think I've done maybe 8 best balls so far. I'm on 2 redraft leagues that we've drafted in, a dynasty owner one as well too. So I have a little bit of experience right now into what I'm finding to be important information, context that I want to have entering the draft. And, we might be fantasy experts, but I think we're dealing with the same questions at the beginning of the draft process that many of you out there listening would be as well too. what do I want to do in my roster? Do I want to have 2 running backs over the first 3 picks? Do I want to draft a quarterback early, late? When am I targeting some of these sleeper running backs? All these questions are going to unfold as we continue on through really #draft season. But right now, we're at the very start of it, as much the NFL teams are too. So there's a couple of questions that I think, and Jake, you can chime in as well too, that I've had to identify that I at least want to have an answer for. You could change things up, but I want to have an answer for it to begin with. And the first one's going to be, when do you want to take a quarterback? And this is important because we have Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen all going within the first 4 rounds thereabouts. In whatever order you might have them in, it's those 3 and that range. And the question becomes, do you take one of those guys who have the upper echelon elite production, or do you wait till there's some value guys that we'll discuss later on a quarterback that you could target instead? So is there a strategy, Jake, that you kind of tend to appreciate one or the other?
Yeah, I'm glad we're addressing this, and this tends to be something we address almost every year, it feels like, and rightfully so, because everybody whose first time is playing fantasy football wants to generally ask this question. When I would go on radio shows, they want to ask this question. It's part of the list here. And some people who are playing fantasy for the first time will look and see, well, geez, 8 of the top 10 fantasy scorers last year in standard leagues were all quarterbacks. They scored the most points. Why don't we take them in the first round? And, that's a very flawed way of thinking. And, I'll get into that a little bit because all the quarterbacks are the highest scoring, right? So, the difference between, QB1 and QB8 marginally is probably going to be a lot different than the difference between RB1 and RB8. So, to try to explain that, you can get good quarterbacks and wait still, whereas you want to put a lot of draft stock into, into the harder to find skill positions like running backs and receivers. And when we did this show last year, I went back a few years and did a little bit of analysis. I would compare quarterback ADP to quarterback scoring, over the years. And I'll be honest with you guys, last year, Josh Allen, he broke the mold. He was number 2 in ADP and he finished number 1 in scoring, basically in a tier of his own. But that seems to me to be maybe the exception and not the norm. And who knows, maybe Josh Allen's about to jump in and take over this league for the next 5 years and force us to rewrite this entire set of rules. That could happen. I won't rule it out. But in 2020, 2019, and 2018, 3 years in a row, the top overall quarterback score was not a top 3 in average draft position here. So, if that trend continues, again, a 4-year sample size, that's not much. But the point of this is you want to find guys. If you're a league winner, a league winning play is to wait on quarterbacks. The conservative, maybe like you take the quarterback early, you're missing such a solid running back or receiver that'll anchor your lineup and be in there every week. The goal is to find, Justin Herbert before he broke out. Justin Herbert turned out to be, he was number 7 in ADP last year, and he was the number 2 overall scorer here. Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts, none of those guys sniffed the top 10 in ADP, and those guys were league winners. Matthew Stafford was a league winner, and he was 10 in ADP. So you're looking at guys you can get in rounds 8 through 12, and you got to find the guy that you can get in rounds 8 through 12, and that's the league winning draft pick right there here. So I will always, I'll very rarely take a quarterback early. I mean, it would have to be, again, because you always adjust your draft strategy, right? Mm-hmm. If you're slipping into the 3rd or 4th round and suddenly Mahomes or Herbert are somehow still on the draft board because everybody's been listening to this show, everyone wants to shore up your skill positions, then yes, that would be a situation when you call an audible. But the price that you're paying for these guys is usually a 2nd round pick, sometimes an early 2nd round pick, and that's just way too steep to pay for any quarterback, even generational talents here.
So it's funny you mentioned that. I completely agree, and I think as we continue on throughout the fantasy draft process, I will have more rosters where it's lesser upper end quarterbacks. So I think 3 shares of Justin Herbert in the best ball leagues that I've done thus far, and I should say I've done 8 best ball and 3 redraft. Those numbers, at least from redraft perspective, are going to triple over the next couple of weeks, and I would imagine best ball is probably around there too. And Jake, it's probably the same for you too. I love the drafting process, and I think this is a lot of fun and could be used for unique ways from a viewership perspective. I did take Justin Herbert in a couple spots. I took him in the Vegas draft, which we'll kind of discuss a little bit further. And not only did I take Justin Herbert in round 4, I actually also took Lamar Jackson in round 7. And my thought process was, especially in these expert leagues, and I know you're aware of it, the experts tend to fade the quarterback position because they know the stats that you said, Jake, where, X, Y, and Z can change things around, but you have these value guys. What ends up happening is overall the quarterback position gets depressed. So while you might have Mahomes or Josh Allen or Herbert that don't parlay into the advantage that you hoped you would get in round 3, 4, 5 drafting them, you're going to still have that advantage because they're going down further. I'm not giving 11 other people a Lamar Jackson round 7 advantage. Point blank, straight up, it will not happen. And this doesn't apply to the super flex leagues. I get it, but like there are going to be players with this quarterback or even like a running back. Antonio Gibson fell to round 8 in this draft as well too. I don't want smart users to have that type of advantage, and I think you have to be mindful that even if you are putting yourself at a disadvantage a little bit from a drafting perspective.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what I'm getting at when I talk about being ready to call an audible and make that play. If all 11 other members of your league are fading quarterbacks entirely, there eventually gets to be a point where it's advantageous to take one. Absolutely. And one last thing I'll say on quarterbacks is I have a personal dilemma in a keeper league of mine regarding Justin Herbert here, where we only get 2 keepers and you pay the price that you paid at auction or via Fab, the season before here. And I think this dilemma perfectly illustrates, our quarterback situation here. I could keep Justin Herbert for $12 and, every auction list, we'll talk more about auctions, I'm sure, down the road here, but every auction list has him going for well over that. But also I could keep James Conner for $6 and T Higgins for $8. So the decision for me is easy. Even if you look at projections and total fantasy points, Herbert's probably going to score 200 points than either of the 200 more points. Maybe that's an exaggeration. 150 more points, let's say, than either of those players. But I'm definitely keeping the skill guys. I'm keeping the running back and the wide receiver because I'm confident that, the auction dollars I'll save, in terms of the margins on those guys will allow me to get a somewhat decent quarterback, and also that there will be plenty of other decent quarterbacks available. Nobody really keeps quarterbacks in a format like this because everyone is well-versed and generally pretty educated on how to construct the roster of their fantasy team.
Wait, was there a question? Do I need to pick which one to have for you?
Oh no, I'm answering my own question.
Okay,
in that my answer is T Higgins and James Conner, and then I'm throwing Herbert back into the field, even though theoretically he provides some value here. Now, if you think differently on that dilemma and you have a case for taking Herbert,
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on that choice. Even though, as a guy that again is taking Herbert in round 4, and to be honest, I'll stick the flag here. I think he's by far. I like him more than Mahomes. So I think he's a top 2 QB overall, and maybe I'm not getting extreme value, but I think it makes quite a bit of sense. The only reason I bring up, do you have to decide on the quarterback entering the draft, is because there's a lot of later round guys, and this kind of leads to my next point. When you are drafting, have tiers in your mind, and I'm saying running back tiers, wide receiver tiers, quarterback tiers. That's really important. I found that's most helpful in this past draft when I was doing with friends and guys at the Vegas draft. And all these guys are really sharp and know what's happening, and quick decisions are being made. We're hazing each other about how fast the selection's going, yada, yada. I want to have a mental idea of, I think this player, let's just say Leonard Fournette, for example, is equal to another player, let's say Aaron Jones. And maybe I have a preference one way or the other, but more or less they're in that same tier. Or quarterback, for example, like Derek Carr is in the same spot as Kirk Cousins. So when I see Kirk Cousins go, I know I need to have a Derek Carr selection in mind, or I'm just going to be punting that tier. I don't know, like Jake, in past drafts, do you rank these players in tiers beforehand? I know the RotoWire app has a number of different ways to be able to use that feature as well too. Or are you more like I'll go off the cheat sheet in the board and more or less operate with my tier system in that place instead?
Yeah, I don't necessarily mark up a cheat sheet and whatnot, but I do have it in my head, like, drafting, making sure to draft the last of a tier. If you're deciding between 2 positions and there are, 4 wide receivers that you'd equally like, but after, say, like Zach Ertz, you have the tight end tier line dropping off, I'd be more likely to take the tight end than one of the 4 receivers, because the chances of one of those 4 receivers who I value equally coming back to me is better than waiting out this run on tight ends and having to punt the position or something like that. So, and that works, tight end being especially scarce of a position this year. That's one where you have to think about tiers a lot in fantasy football. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. All the RotoWire draft tools, you can kind of customize your tiers by position however you'd like here, and you can even sort the player list by tiers. But it's a very long-standing and very popular draft strategy to set your tiers ahead of time. I usually don't take the time to go through and mark them all. I kind of keep it up here, and then you just like want to make sure, like, well, in auctions, a lot of times you'll see people will crazy overpay for the last player in a tier because they missed out on that. And you don't want to be the sucker that ends up going through and overpaying like that. So it's almost more important in auctions to tier base. But definitely, I see what you're saying in snake drafts, which I think is going to be the focus of what we discussed today.
For sure. And, maybe you're spoiling the content for next week when we talk about the auction keeper draft, as you and I both get prepared for the stake league, which happens a little bit after that time period. But yeah, it's the tier thing is really important to me. And I really think this year it's important because it's answering the questions that we'll pose to you. Again, where do you want to take the quarterback? Okay, well, if you don't want to go early on, who are your later round tiers? And is there that mid tier, whether it be like a Jalen Hurts or Tom Brady or Joe Burrow or Trey Lance? And I think that's going to be kind of a unique conversation that you have to have this year is what do you want to do with some of these younger quarterbacks? So Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields to a lesser extent. Like I just don't believe in what the Bears are doing. But the other three, it's like they're in different spots of the draft, but they are all guys that you might have to draft or probably will draft depending on how deep your league is. So I won't do this for every position, Jake, but I actually do think it's important to talk about our late round QBs now while we are in this conversation. I've identified a few, and I want you to say yes or no on guys you like or don't like, and then we'll kind of maybe circle on one or two that you really are into. So my late round QB value, now again, I'm thinking like 11 and later. That's what late round is to me. Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Matt Ryan, who I was getting in best ball like 18, the last round of best ball, who's now going a little bit higher than that. But I love Matt Ryan as a late guy. And then like Trey Lance, who I know doesn't fit that criteria closely, but this is an 8 through 11 round QB guy in Trey Lance, who I know a lot of people might be concerned with that I like quite a bit. So is there anybody from that list that you are yes or no on, or is even more that you want to add on to the late round guys?
Yeah, so those guys for me, maybe Carr could, they've had such a long sample size that you know what you're getting out of them. You're getting anywhere from QB 12 to QB 15, depending on who's healthy and who puts in 16 games over the course of the years. So it's good to get one of those to have a stable quarterback that can, you can kind of count on for 20 fantasy points a week for the most part. So, I'm not going to veto any of those guys by any means, but what I'm trying to focus on too is you pair, if you're going to wait that long on quarterbacks, you want to pair a stable guy with a guy like upside. And you want to talk about a guy, similar to Jalen Hurts last year, turned out to be an exceptional fantasy quarterback. And, you have the rushing in there and there's some team context too. But Trey Lance, man, you're paying, people are almost ahead of the curve on this strategy because Trey Lance is suddenly a top 100 pick in the NFFC and he's QB 13 overall. He's going right behind Aaron Rodgers, right in front of Carr and Cousins. But a guy like Trey Lance is somebody that you should be targeting. I think, maybe not Trey Lance in specific, but someone like Trey Lance has a much bigger chance to go from QB 15 and ADP up to a top 5 QB fantasy scorer. The ceiling's so high. He's got Debo around for now, and he can create extra fantasy points with his legs, even in losing efforts. And, they've had a hard time with running back stability. They kind of carousel through. So the quarterback will get a lot of the rushing combo there. And, I go further down the list here. I did want to ask you about your boy last year. Is Trevor Lawrence dead to you, or are you still going to give him a chance? Because I know dealing with your personal biases is a whole nother topic that we can discuss here. Guys that hurt you in the past, guys that got injured in the past. I know a lot of people that weren't touching Joe Mixon at any cost, and it's coming into the same thing this year about, do I want to not touch Saquon Barkley at any cost because he's burned me so many times in the past? You kind of have to erase those personal biases and start fresh here. But when you talk about a young guy on a team that has a better coaching situation, a better talent personnel situation, more healthy, Trevor Lawrence is a guy that could easily go from QB 20 to QB 10, if things fall the right way, and you're going to get him at a much cheaper price than someone like Trey Lance. What are your thoughts on him this year?
Yeah, you and I were both in Vegas last week for the Rotowire annual Vegas trip, and you don't know this, but I had slipped out for a nice drive, and we went to the middle of the desert, and I actually dug a pit, and I put Urban Meyer there. Trevor Lawrence I saved, actually. Trevor Lawrence and I were hanging out. We put Urban Meyer in the pit. We found out actually that Urban Meyer had already put himself in the pit when he was at that bar, 7 months ago with that one lady. Yeah,
Thumbs up to that, right?
Yeah, I'm actually still completely fine with Trevor Lawrence. I did get burned. He was one of those guys that I was completely in on as a later round QB that never materialized. But I love the Doug Peterson change. I like the weapon of Christian Kirk being added to this mix, and Travis Etienne now coming back from that foot injury. Who I wasn't in on Etienne last year. I'm a little bit more interested, I guess. I'm probably still not going to have many shares of him, but we'll get to that as well from a roster construction standpoint. I will be completely fine taking Trevor Lawrence. The guy that I have changed my tune on is Zach Wilson. It's not for the reasons you'd think it is, although Twitter might make you think so. I just like he was not very good last year, and I was not a huge fan of Zach Wilson whatsoever when he was drafted. I thought of the quarterbacks of that past class, he was 4 ahead of Mac Jones or right around that range. And I know Mac did well, Wilson did not. How can you fail as a QB given the circumstances that Zach Wilson's going to have? So better tight end play. The O line's going to be improved. I think the addition of Elijah Moore in the second year is going to be nice. Garrett Wilson might be like the 4th receiver on that team. He's pretty darn talented. And you also have Breece Hall, who's going to make things better from a rushing perspective. Overall, the Jets got significantly better offensively. So if Zach Wilson is just like even mediocre, he should be a guy that goes well and above his ADP.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying here. You find a guy like Zach Wilson, who's QB 25 in the NFFC right now. He suddenly, he certainly has the weapons to do it. He suddenly moves up to QB 12 even. That's not even too crazy. I'm not calling him a top 10 or anything like that. If he ends up at QB 12, that's a league winning kind of pick here because you waited on quarterback. You bolstered the depth of the rest of your roster. You're going to have injuries. You need to have depth. And, Wilson's one that could do that. I know you said that you don't like Fields before, but I could see him having a Jalen Hurts type of year where, in a sense, where he gets points with his rushing and he from an offensive standpoint, the Bears find themselves behind in the second half. I mean, Jalen Hurts managers last year, you knew the situation, right? You were going to get, maybe 3 or 4 fantasy points in the first half, and then he was going to make up for it with 15, 20 in the second half, unless he's, just started throwing picks and getting benched. I see a similar situation with Justin Fields, whereas he's viable. And, some of this guys like Wilson and Fields might not always get taken in your standard 12-team league, single quarterback redraft type deal. And those are guys you put on your watch list and maybe see how they're doing and think. And they're easily guys I could see us discussing.
I was going to say that we talk about
in week 1 of the waiver wire here. And that's a great super flex strategy too here. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into that yet, but I was looking when we do get to your super flex, there's one team that stand out to me, and it's the first team that decided to not go quarterback in round 1 here. So I don't know if we want to jump to that or we want to hit some other draft points first.
We'll come back to because I think there's ways to circle back to the super flex questions that pop up too. But you're right. There's some interesting strategies there. I want to jump to the other part that I think is really important before we get to work for some of our sponsors. But it's how many running backs do you want to have after round 3? This is going to be a surprisingly crucial question. And again, I'm sure everyone out there listening is like, oh, well, yeah, Joe, we answer this every year. It's X, Y, and Z. And you're right. I mean, I'm the patron saint of I will take 2 running backs within the first 3 rounds. I've been doing that for a number of years now. I think this might be the year where we can deviate from that strategy. It's really before over the last 3 or 4 years. It's to a point, though. I want to stress that because as we're doing this podcast, July 26th, things can dramatically change as more people are getting involved. The ADP changes on your ESPN and Yahoo sites, whatever else. But right now, with the way things stand, I think you are set to take only 1 running back within the first 3 rounds more than ever before. But I guess, Jake, have you kind of seen that thought process?
Yeah, so there are 2 thought processes here. One is, of course, like you said, you take 2 out of your first 3 running backs because it's the hardest position to fill in fantasy football. And the first 3 rounds of the draft are really the only chances you're going to have to get a workhorse back. After that, you're looking at committee guys and are hoping that your guy gets a shot every week. Now, the complete opposite of that strategy, which was coined probably 5 or 6 years ago, it wasn't too far after I started working for Rotowire here, is the 0 running back strategy here, where you take no running backs until rounds 5 or 6 and then try to make up with them. You try to make up that position by going quantity over quality. You draft, that's your most drafted position. You have 6 guys, you get some backups and hope one of them works out. And 2, you combat that by knowing you're running back short, that you jump on the first fab bid of the year, be ready to dump your whole
the Elijah Mitchell from last year.
Yes, exactly. Be ready to, And again, it takes some skill to get a guy like that too, because there's always a couple false flags for every Elijah Mitchell there is. But so there are two thought processes this year, and to me, it varies at every point in the draft. I know Pete shot a great video for our YouTube channel where he basically says if you don't get Jonathan Taylor or Dalvin Cook in the first round, to pretty much go zero running backs and go wide receivers, with the thought process being you use wide receivers on your first two picks. You could end up with Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams, or Jamar Chase and Tyreek Hill or something like that. Guys, and the jury's still out on Tyreek Hill, but in theory, you're taking guys that are generally safer, right? And guys that are maybe a little less injury prone than a running back who's got a lot of tread on his tires, and you just have those surefire receiver spots getting you 20 points a week in your lineup, being safe, and then you'll just kind of figure out running back as you go. And to be able to, it's a very, very viable draft strategy that depends on your pick. It depends on who's on the board. I think it's easier to execute at maybe 6, 7, 8 in the draft, because there's definitely a chance that, or a good chance that the safe running backs or running backs that you deem safe are going to be gone. And so it's more viable then. And it also depends on who gets taken and who do you put in that tier 1 of running backs. And if I'm going to tier running backs, I put Jonathan Taylor number 1
in his own tier, right?
And I'm pretty sure I'm putting him in his own tier, right? Yeah. But then you have to decide, man, do I really trust Christian McCaffrey at number 2? He's number 2 in NFFC ADP, going back to February. So, maybe I'm going back a little too far on this, but, do you trust him in his injury history? Do you trust Dalvin Cook and his injury history? I mean, hasn't had like the big injury, but he's definitely missed games every single year. You're absolutely going to have to go up the draft board for his backup. Austin Eckler misses a few games every single year. Derrick Henry, who I love, by the way, is coming back off an injury, and I'm actually unique in a sense where I'm going to put him in that tier, and I will take him, in the top 5 to 7 picks. I know that's, we can elaborate that on another thing down the road. But there are flags with all these guys except for Jonathan Taylor. I mean, McCaffrey's injury history is the worst out of all of them. Dalvin Cook's got a lot of carries and already has some injury history. Austin Eckler tends to miss some key games every year, though Austin Eckler in PPR is generally a consensus top 5 player here. Naji Harris, people wonder, is he going to catch as many passes without Big Ben? So, you look at this list of running backs that, that wind up in this tier, and you think to yourself, do I want to roll the dice on a position that has such a high bust rate in the first round, especially over the last few years? Or do I just go ahead and grab Cooper Kupp, hope for a guy like, Stephon Diggs or CeeDee Lamb or even Deebo Samuel coming back, and then bang, bang, I have 2 stud players that I am more confident in being healthy. I am more confident in producing here. And there's no right answer in this, right? You're going to have to decide, again, based on where you are in the draft, and based on who is taken before you, how the other people define their tiers compared to your own. And then you're going to have to make a call based on that. Every draft is different. I don't like going into a draft just tied to a particular strategy. And that's kind of back to our recurring theme here.
Yeah, I think you teed me up really well, because I've done a number of these drafts. And while you're right, it changes and people might do things different than you would anticipate, there's more or less a consensus ideal start that I've been liking. And it actually comes from the pick 1.4. So again, your first round, the 4th overall spot. If you are in a league, and honestly, we could talk about this in a future podcast, things that we'd encourage to make the fantasy sports feel better. I wish more leagues would allow you to pick your draft spot. I think that actually adds a layer of strategy. And that's all I want in fantasy sports, is just more ways to have strategy. So if you are in a league that picks your spot, 1.4 is my favorite because of this. You get the Jonathan Taylor tier, who's normally going 1.1. Fine. If you are unlucky enough to get that, okay, whatever. It's the 3 wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Cooper Kupp, that I actually have as my tier 2 overall. And I like having the ability to get one of them. I will take any of those wide receivers over Christian McCaffrey, who I have concerns with from a health perspective. Now, this is coming from a full point PPR format. If we were in standard, I will take Derrick Henry number 2, which is kind of where you and I are in the same thought process. But in full point PPR, I want one of those 3 wide receivers. The idea is that I'll get one of those top guys at the position who I think are head and shoulders be ahead of the next one, and then hopefully get a running back in round 2. And I'll give you some of the guys that I like to target in round 2. There's no point where Austin Eckler is going to fall to that section in a full point PPR format, but maybe Nick Chubb will. I had DeAndre Swift in our Vegas league, which is full point PPR, fall to me at 2.10, which is the third pick in the first round if you were to go backwards with that. And then also look at Aaron Jones might get to that point as well too. One of those guys will more than likely be there. Now I want 1.4 because I have no concerns with the wide receiver tier that I mentioned, but I want whatever ability is to get the best running back available in the next way back. So that's kind of my thought process. And to kind of fully flesh this out, how many running backs am I taking within the first 3 rounds? It really depends from there. If the running back value works out for round 3, fine. We had Jeff Erickson mention this at the Vegas draft. Mandatory Montgomery, David Montgomery, the running back for the Bears. I love that nickname. That's perfect because I did feel like
didn't Brad Evans coin that one?
That could be as well too. Maybe not, but yeah, I might think about David Montgomery in the 3rd round. What you believe Alvin Kamara's stats will be this season? He's a perfect example. Javonte Williams, Leonard Fournette is the guy that I'll take in a full point PPR, no matter how fat he is. I think he'll be fine enough for a PPR format. But that's the question that I only have to answer in round 3. So if you were to say, Joe, right now, which spot do you love the most drafting wise? It's 1.4. Now I will just quickly bring up, because we had a question in the draft. I'm sorry, in the channel here. Jay Reed asks, he has the 9th pick overall. How many running backs should you take through 3 rounds? I've had the 8th pick in a number of situations, and almost by default, I get Dalvin Cook every time. I think the value is too great. But that's going to lead us to the next part.
I've seen Dalvin Cook going 2 though, so that you definitely can make a plan where you're looking at that.
So Dalvin Cook, Naji Harris, Joe Mixon, one of those 3, or Austin Eckler, one of those 4 is going to be there at 1.8 or 1.9. I really like the wide receivers, and I feel there's less concerns about the wide receivers, I should say, in round 2 and 3, as opposed to the running backs. And I think one of our longtime listeners, Julia J, had also mentioned Travis Etienne as like a mid-round guy. Wrong. He's going in the 3rd round along with the Ezekiel Elliott and the Saquon Barkley, who's now getting pushed up with some notable helium. I don't want any of those guys because I think there's reasonable questions with them, whereas the wide receivers in that same spot, I don't know. Here's the part that people aren't realizing. There are starting running backs, like guaranteed they will be effective starting running backs in rounds 5 and 6 and 7 that I like far more value than everyone else. So Elijah Mitchell is the perfect example. I probably have an 85% roster share of Elijah Mitchell at the moment. I get it. Yes, the Niners drafted a running back in the 3rd round. Oh, we know that Kyle Shanahan likes to change things all the time, yada, yada. When Elijah Mitchell was playing, he was the guy, like getting 20, 25 touches per game, whether it be targets or otherwise. And I don't care about a crappy back from LSU who's supposed to be their power guy really chipping into that. Maybe Trey Sermon becomes more of a factor or whatever else. I don't know. But it's Elijah Mitchell's show, and then it's the backup to earn there. He's going in round 6. That's a starting running back who I guarantee will be running back 2 production that you're getting in round 6. The same could go for a J.K. Dobbins, who I have to imagine falls further down ADP-wise after the news about maybe he won't go on the pup list. I think when Dobbins is healthy, he is going to be a factor as well too. But there's the Antonio Gibsons, who I'm fading the Washington offense overall, going in around 6 and 7. In the Vegas draft, he fell to the back end of the 7th. That's another guaranteed starter tuna, despite the workload concerns. He will get RB2 value. There's way too many guys in that range. A.J. Dillon, our boy, Packers fan, who's also in that same category, that I think fit RB2 range quite a bit. So as a result, I want just one RB through the first 3 rounds, and whether it be tight end, quarterback, or wide receiver, I know I will get my RB2 value later in the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple comments there. I go back to the 14-team expert league that I'm trying here, and I ended up with A.J. Dillon in the 4th round. I'd pick 5, and then coming back, Antonio Gibson got taken 1 pick before me. So I think that's great value on someone like Gibson. Of course, there's injury risk there, but I will contend that generally it's tough. I mean, a 5th round and beyond running backs are getting pretty ugly, and you're definitely going to have to load up the position there. And, I'm looking at these guys.
You were in a 14.
Yeah, this is a 14-team league, so that would normally be a 15-team guy. But you're looking at I'm just looking at some 5th-round guys. So Gibson I talked about. Cordero Patterson I don't trust at all. Chase Edmonds I don't really trust in a new scene there. Damian Harris. I'll even go back to the 4th round because we're talking about these. You're looking at Breece Hall. And on paper, yeah, that could be great, but you don't know. So this is why it's important. In my eyes, to get the running backs early if you can, and to backtrack even a little bit further here. We had the user who asked about pick number 9. I'm definitely looking at chances are at 9, most of the drafts that I've seen have, Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson going before that. So that makes it really hard to go 0 running back. And in that situation, I'm kind of liking Joe Mixon at 9. And of course, I like Derrick Henry at 9 if he falls, which he is in a lot of PPR drafts. And I'd be comfortable even in PPR taking Derrick Henry, at the 9 spot. So the 9 spot, if we're looking at that in particular, for me, that's one where I think I'm going to target a running back. But if you really are committed to 0 running back strategy, think you're going to be an active owner on the waiver wire, then maybe you can start to think about stretching, maybe reaching a little bit for a Devontae Adams or a Deebo Samuel, or heck, you could go Kelsey in that spot. But, those are all pretty safe picks that you can get there out of 9. But I think the first thing I'm looking to do is to go Mixon or Henry if those guys can fall. And last but not least, I know you love 1.4 as your draft spot. I don't like to overthink this, to be completely honest with you. If I get to pick any draft spot, I'm picking 1.1 every year. No doubt about it here. Yeah, it's lame, but you're getting to go to the top of the top of the round in half of the rounds. You're getting Jonathan Taylor to start, and you're getting 2 more very, very solid picks here. I've done, the best leagues that I've been able to participate in. I've been out of the 1 spot, and it just makes your draft a whole lot easier. So if you're picking, if you draw the first, you get the first shot out of the hat. Don't overcomplicate it. Go 1.1. Statistically, you'll get the best players, the highest ranked players on your cheat sheet, and you'll get more opportunities to draft good players.
I agree with you, right? And JT is a very safe 1.1 compared to this past seasons that we've had. So as the Madison fanboys, we like Jonathan Taylor quite a bit. I will take 1.4, and I want the best player in the back turn, which you don't get at 1.1 if you're going that direction. So I present these questions to you because, again, I've done enough drafts where you more or less have an outline. If you go X strategy, this is what you're more or less giving up. And I want the users and listeners out there to at least have an idea of what that will look like depending on how things work out for your draft. Before we do that, though, I want to get a word from our sponsors, Blue Wire. Okay, so we're back, and I'm talking about more of these value picks, or at least what's going to happen from a strategy perspective if you are going a certain direction. So let's just play this out. If you go quarterback early, again, that's Josh Mahomes. Yeah, we might as well call it Josh Mahomes and Herbert. I don't know if there's a way to combine all 3 names, but if you go one of those 3 quarterbacks, you're likely missing out on what most people would say conventional RB2 is. So at least what Jake was describing. So the Ezekiel Elliott's, the Saquon Barkley's, the Etienne's, the mandatory Montgomery, those guys probably are not available for you in round 3. Because remember, if you take the quarterback in round 3 or 4, you're missing out on the opportunity cost of taking X position.
And the other thing with that, I want to add on here is, say you end up in a draft where someone like Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson or even Lamar Jackson is falling to rounds 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You're obviously not going to take one of those guys because you used your draft stock on one of those top 3 players. So you're going back and you're thinking, man, maybe I have to take a receiver or running back that I'm not as high on when the best pick at the position would have been this quarterback, with the best value would have been this quarterback. But you're eliminating your ability to do that by taking a quarterback early. And that's just one of the points I forgot when I was, ranting against that earlier in the show.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because then I found, like, later in drafts, there's in particular value at wide receiver. There's a lot of guys I like, which we'll get to in just a second, and running back less so. So it becomes a little bit concerning. I think you have to be sharper with your thought process. It's not that you can't go quarterback early, but you have to be prepared for what the weaknesses are in your team if you do go the direction. Now, let's say you go running back heavy early. So I'm thinking, again, if you are 1.9, you might take a Joe Mixon, and then you come back and say, hey, Aaron Jones in a full-point PPR league, how can I pass that up? Great. You're more than less punting at quarterback. This might be the situation, Jake, that you're discussing, where you'll take a quarterback at round 9, 10, 11, 12 and say, I will get wide receivers in the middle tier. I don't want to sacrifice the value that I'm going to be having early on. And if that's the case, maybe more power too. There's a lot of quarterbacks later on that we discussed that we like from a value perspective. And you have to hope that a Zach Wilson or Trevor Lawrence or Kirk Cousins really plays above beyond the expectation. But you went over the history of quarterbacks in fantasy. It happens every year. You just have to get the right one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would disagree by saying that you're automatically punting quarterback if you get through the first 4 rounds and there's not one there. I mean, there's still going to be opportunities for you to fill those positions. Absolutely here.
And then the other thought process, okay, let's say if you want to go wide receiver or pass catcher heavy, and I say pass catcher because at this point, the way the draft season's working out, Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews are top 16 picks both. Like, you have to consider taking both of them within the top 16 picks. If you go that direction, you go wide receiver and tight end heavy, you will have to figure out the running back spot, whether it be Chase Edmonds in round 7, like I did in the Vegas draft, or an Elijah Mitchell, AJ Dillon double tap within round 4 and 5, something to that extent. You are also punting at quarterback too. You probably have to wait later on to get quarterback, knowing I need depth at wide receiver or I need depth at running back later on. Either way, either one of those strategies makes it. However, you have a safer floor that you're discussing from a wide receiver perspective, like Peter Schenke said in that video that we have on our YouTube page, where you want those guys that are going to be consistent producers for you. There's no wrong, so there's no right answer for any one of these 3 strategies, but you do have to be aware of what you're signing yourself up for when you go X, Y, and Z direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate, just because you're waiting out Aaron Rodgers, or even if you get down to Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins, I don't necessarily call that punting at quarterback unless it's a super flex league and you're waiting that far here. But because there's always somebody out there, and the 15 to 25 tier for quarterbacks. As I'm looking through this, I'm drooling a little bit. There are some guys people are sleeping on that are going to be juicy as ever, and it's just I want to keep those options to take one of these quarterbacks later in the draft and not toss that option out by taking Mahomes in round 2 or 3.
I agree, and like I said, as somebody who's went Herbert in a third of the leagues thus far, I have a feeling I'm going to go quarterback later on. In a lot more of these, because I think it just adds a little bit more flexibility. But that's just my way of approaching this. There's a lot of different ways out there. I want to explain at least my thought process and how I went through these drafts, and we'll post the pictures themselves on Twitter after the fact. And it's not super helpful, but we'll do that after the fact so you guys can see. Otherwise, there are RotoWire members who already have that out there. Like I'm using this off of Nick Whalen's Twitter, which is at WHA1EN. New guy that's taking over for a lot of our social media and overall media stuff and doing a great job. He was a participant. I shouldn't say new guy, but he's new to doing this role. I apologize, Nick.
Fantasy football.
Listening. Thank you. Yes. This is the draft that I'm talking about, where the Vegas draft, I did take Herbert round 4, and I also took Lamar Jackson 7. In this league, when you have 11 other smart people drafting, I don't want somebody to have the advantage of having Lamar Jackson round 7. I will put myself at a disadvantage, theoretically, by taking a quarterback, a second one within the first 8 rounds, to make sure you don't have that. And maybe I'm wrong with this, and Jake, you'll probably laugh at me. I know many others have at the office thus far, but you know what it's like to have a really, really great quarterback on a significant deal. There are so many other things you can do with your roster that others just don't have because you have that advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we, since we're talking about quarterbacks, do we touch a little bit on Superflex? I mean, we're getting up to almost 50 minutes already, and this has been flying by. So, I'm referring to a sleeper draft here, and punting quarterbacks means something entirely different in the super flex, where for the uninitiated, it's your flex spot can include a quarterback, your wide receiver, tight end, running back spot. It can include a quarterback, and of course the most advantageous strategy is to use a quarterback in that along with your regular starting quarterback. So it becomes essentially a 2 quarterback league here, and it's designed to mimic real life NFL, where the quarterback is the most important position. Thank you for finding those, Joe. I was trying to get that, but
I'll pull the Superflex one too.
Yep, I'm with 2 computers here. But anyway, so I was looking at I did not participate in this Vegas league on Sleeper, but the first 4 picks were quarterbacks, and then Sasha went Jonathan Taylor at 1.5, and he took. And then basically on the way back, he got Matt Stafford, and then he waited till way, way down the line to get another quarterback. And I think because he did that, he was able to load up his roster with one of the deepest and incredibly and most incredible stacked teams here. So he has Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb are his 1-2, Leonard Fournette, Deontay Johnson, David Montgomery, Amari Cooper, Smith-Schuster, Ertz, all before he ended up taking Mariota, then got Renfro down the line. And this is just the team. I love this team more than any other team in here, and it's because he punted quarterback in the Superflex league. Stafford will be stable. He'll probably have to play the wire a little bit because he's got guys like, his last 3 picks, he did quantity over quality, right? He's got Ritter, he's got Huntley, he's got Willis, young guys that we don't even know if we're going to play. So he's going to have to count on one of those guys to maybe break out. But the rest of his roster looks so good because he's getting elite tier 1 or tier 2 players to fill out all of his skill. And again, it's just a super flex. You don't necessarily have to start the quarterback there. So you can always, until one of your lottery tickets hit, you can wait it out and do that. So I'm actually Listen, I've only one or two of my leagues are super flex leagues every year, so I don't proclaim to be the super flex expert. But every time I see and I look at someone trying to punt quarterbacks in a super flex league, I end up liking their team way more than everybody else, and that could very well just be me. But it's something to watch, and it's a strategy to certainly perhaps consider if you're going into one of these types of drafts.
Well, we're going to talk about, because I did punt it, not to the extent that you're discussing with Sasha, but I also did punt quarterback too. And maybe it's because I am a fantasy football dummy. I'm not sure. But if you do love fantasy football and struggle to get your friends or loved ones interested, you're in luck. Fantasy Football for Dummies is the book for you. It takes anyone by the hand and walks them through everything you need to know about playing fantasy football, from the basics of drafting to more advanced concepts and strategies for weekly play in the playoffs. I mean, if you're not listening to this podcast, I think this book would be the way to go. There's even a new section devoted to daily fantasy sports and how to win real cash prizes. With this book, your friends and loved ones will get you up to speed on your favorite game and be able to hold their own in any fantasy football league. They'll have all the information at their fingertips to make the informed decision on how to have a successful draft, who to start and who to bench each week. And finally, they can experience the thrill of victory and hopefully avoid the agony of defeat against their competition. Who knows? They might even get good enough to beat you as well. Share the love and purchase your copy of Fantasy Football for Dummies today. And again, I say maybe I'm the dummy because I did punt quarterback to an extent in the Superflex draft. I had 1.6, so not quite on my 1.4 favorability scale, but it's fine. I was worried that if I had 1.5, I would have to take Jonathan Taylor, because I really didn't want to do that in a Superflex league where, again, if you're unfamiliar with this, Superflex means there's a starting quarterback. There's a starting quarterback that's played, and then one of the flex positions will be another quarterback. So I took Lamar Jackson at 1.6, and then I followed it up with Mark Andrews. This was a tight end premium draft, so you get 1.5 points per reception per 10. I thought Andrews and Kelsey, to some extent as well, fell way below their value. But I was okay looking at my James Conner and my Elijah Mitchell as my running back 1 and 2, because I knew I was going to have value at running back. It was wide receiver that I really wanted to imagine. So I took Stephon Diggs and Mike Evans in my round 3 and round 4 selection. I like both Diggs and Evans significantly more than any of the wide receivers you mentioned on the previous team. And then I was able to get my quarterbacks, my super flex quarterbacks, either Mac Jones or Jameis Winston. I thought a respectable round 7 and an 8 price tag. That's way better to than Marcus Mariota, who you had mentioned is a guy that you liked that took 2 rounds later. Why are you hating on my draft, Jake?
Oh, you know what? I'm not necessarily hating on your draft. I just didn't even mention it. I was just infatuated with Sasha's draft. But no, the draft is fine here. I actually like Mac Jones. I mean, I think we were talking about some of those young quarterbacks that have a chance that they could take a step. Mac Jones is basically already taken that step, so it's easy for him to get overlooked. But if he improves by as much of a margin as we're expecting some of those other guys to improve upon, then hey, maybe you could have something. And I mean, there are some. Yeah, I have questions about the receiving core there, but it's a strong group of running backs here. There's a good tight end combo here. Outside of, I'm loving Jacoby Myers' price in PPR leagues, and he's one of those guys that you can get relatively cheap. More of a full PPR guy than anything else. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm fine if you got Mac Jones as your quarterback too, and you could know that he wasn't going to go until the 7th round, and you could load up. You can get your tight end, 2 solid wideouts, 2 decent running backs, and then wait and still get Mac Jones. I'd be all about that draft. I think that one works for me. Your strategy is solid there.
This is why I like doing the podcast with you, Jake, because there's a lot of different ways that we view fantasy sports. And again, nothing's really wrong with it. I actually really liked Peter Shankey's draft, and I'm not just sucking up to the boss here. But in the Superflex draft, he had 1.11. So you think about it, theoretically, 10 other quarterbacks could go. I think in this draft, we had 6 or 7 go in the first round. You're putting yourself at a disadvantage if you do continue on that train. He said, no, I'm just going to go right into the skid here and get the best guys at another position. Drafted both Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. You think about that tantalizing wide receiver combo, but he was able to get both Kirk Cousins and Matt Ryan, who we both liked as some later round value QBs in rounds 3 and 4, and then figure out the rest of his roster with running backs that I mentioned: Dobbins, Gibson, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard. Out of those 4, 2 are at least going to be startable. That's the type of draft that I want after a Superflex.
Yeah, I mean, even Darrell Henderson, a couple spots down. Some of these guys you don't get too excited about. But that was a perfectly executed 0 running back draft. I'll give him that. I'm glad that you have that there.
I love that Julia asked me this question. She said, Joe, you've drafted Isaiah Spiller, technically the backup running back for the Chargers in both drafts. What makes you higher than Ronald Jones? I guess this is a great way to kind of segue into the last little bit of the show, which is discussing some of our late round values. I actually think Ronald Jones is a good later round value. And again, I'm thinking rounds 9 through 12-ish range. But Isaiah Spiller is going to get the guaranteed workload, and I think also be a bit more of a pass catcher than what Ronald Jones is going to do. You think about what Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be for the Chiefs, primarily their pass catcher in the same way Darrell Williams, was for the Chiefs. Edwards-Helaire will do some rushing, but also pass catching. I think Ronald Jones is strictly the runner, whereas the Chargers, you have Isaiah Spiller, who will be a runner, and yes, I think between the tackles, and also do some pass catching. We've seen the Chargers certainly last year, both Austin Eckler and Brandon Staley say, we need more help at running back too. Eckler can't do everything. We need more help, and none of those guys stepped to the plate. You draft Spiller in the 4th round for that exact reason. I think he is one of my favorite later round running back values right now of this entire draft.
Yeah, I'll throw one out, another one out there for you. I mean, Spiller is around 110 in NFFC ADP. Another one is James Cook around 116. I mean, the Bills have never really committed to Singletary. I think there's there's room for someone else to get into the mix there, and it's tough because you have a rookie when Zach Moss and Duke Johnson are around. But I don't know. I don't know if all 4 of those guys will make it through training camp and through roster cuts here.
True.
So James Cook is an interesting one because you have, in theory, the number 1 offense in the entire National Football League, quite possibly. That's their ceiling, of course. And you could possibly get a running back that, even if he's not the bell cow, you're talking about 15, 20 touches a game, and there's certain value in that, especially if he can separate himself as more effective than a Singletary, which hasn't necessarily been too tough to do over the years there. So that's maybe a running back sleeper that you could go to and maybe put on your target, highlight him if you're going with the 0 RB strategy.
There's going to be other guys that we mentioned throughout the podcast in the ensuing weeks, but at least for right now, Isaiah Spiller and to a lesser extent Rachaad White are 2 guys that I like quite a bit. You had mentioned a wide receiver in Jacoby Meyer, who certainly would qualify as a later round wide receiver value. You're right, in full point PPR formats, he's great. I'm thinking round 8 and 9. Again, if I can 1-2 tap these guys in both Allen Lazard and Christian Kirk, I will be happy every single day of the week. I have made my Allen Lazard pick wide receiver 3 on some rosters, and I feel completely confident. I actually have a spoiler for people listening after the fact, a TikTok coming out that's highlighting Allen Lazard as a value pick beyond all value picks. But overall, I think Lazard and both Christian Kirk are tremendous values that I like a lot. And even more so, again, rounds 8 and 9, there's guys a little bit later on too, whether it be Chase Claypool or Russell Gage in that same-ish range that I find can be certainly quality wide receiver 3 and 4s for your team.
Yeah. I mean, there are going to be situations where the running back value in rounds 1 and 2 is just too good to pass up. Maybe you use one of your first 3 picks on Travis Kelce. Maybe you think we're both full of it, and you go ahead and throw Allen or Mahomes in there. Then you're starting to, I mean, you're weakening your wide receivers, and you're looking at guys like this as wide receivers 2, 3, even beyond here, and you could take even a quantity over quality approach and stack up guys like a Tim Patrick. I mean, post hype sleepers like Tony and Ayuk, guys you might be able to buy low on and hope that you can get something out of here. I mentioned Jacoby Myers for cheap. I know people are really heating up on KJ Osborne as a potential sleeper, and there are retreads that you can get later on in the draft, guys like Jarvis Landry, Corey Davis, Randall Cobb, that you might be able to get something out of. So those are some of the guys that you're going to be looking at if you're sacrificing wide receivers in the first 3 to 5 rounds.
All right. Well, that does it for us on the Tuesday edition of the Rotowire NFL podcast. Again, we'll be back next week and every other week moving forward up and through the entire regular season of the NFL. Ideally, during actual regular season date, we'll have waiver wire pickups to discuss. But I think for next week, it's going to be more tailored to the auction draft strategy, what you're going to be doing in those types of leagues, and a little bit of keeper stuff mixed in there too, hopefully, if all things go my way. If you want any of those results from the draft, I know I post them in the channel here, but I can certainly be glad to post them at my Twitter as well too, JB Fantasy Sports, or at RotoJake. I'm sure Jake will be fine to send those out too. But any other questions that you guys have, certainly feel free to direct them our way on Twitter. Again, this podcast was sponsored by Dynasty Owner. We'll be back again next week. Thanks everyone for listening.